We better get started. I'm going to actually start. Anyway. All right. So welcome, everyone, to another edition of the podcast. This is episode number 7. I am John. That is Tom. There's Brad. And look, he's not glitching either. Right?
Yep.
Not
he
yet.
Actually did it on cue.
And guys, we're all together. There's Wade.
Woohoo! Yep.
Good to have all 4 of us here for the very first time, right?
After the podcast, we're getting together for 2-on-2 basketball because we finally have enough. So
I'm playing shirts.
Okay.
I'm playing pants.
Okay.
So you get shirts, I've got pants.
You know what? I think I've got something else going on after this. I'm sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I've got a really long book I'm going to read instead.
War and Peace.
I need to start rewriting the dictionary, guys. I'm sorry. I can't make your game anyway. All right, so we all know our names. You guys heard about all these storms that we've had this year, that we're running out of names for storms.
Oh, my.
That's how active it's been. That's how crazy 2020. I think it's happened before, though, but we run the risk of not having any more names. The storm that's going on in the Gulf right now, going towards my hometown, Galveston, we've called it, what is it? Is this one Beta?
Beta,
yeah.
Beta.
Doesn't that just sound terrifying? Watch out. Here comes Storm Beta. We're running out of names.
It's a beta test.
Yeah. It's not one of those, huh?
No.
But we're running out of names, and I was wondering, like, what name would you give the next storm?
Starting with the C?
Hey, you can do whatever you want. You're in charge. You're the meteorologist here.
Well, I was thinking Greek, it would be Gamma, wouldn't it? Yeah.
You guys follow. So now you want to follow the rules. Okay. You guys.
No. We're just showing you how brilliant we are. We can do ABCs in Greek.
I figure with the way everything's going in 2020, we should just call the next storm Armageddon and just get it over with, man.
There you go. Right. Right.
Well, if we get back to the A's.
You see? Very good. We'll start that.
Yeah, Apocalypse.
So I did a little searching, a little fact checking, because I saw this and I wanted to earn my Boy Scout badge that we talked about last week. But I had to look it up. Clement Raj, I don't know, some guy from Australia back in the 19th century, meteorologist. He's the one that started naming storms, and he started with the Greek alphabet. He did also, I think, Greek mythology. And then he got to a point where he started using names of politicians he did not like.
Oh.
And I feel like there's a sermon in there somewhere. I just haven't found it yet. Maybe if we get to name storms over politicians, athletes, church people we don't like. Can we say that on air?
Yeah. Okay, so church people you don't like starts with an A, John. Go ahead.
I don't have my directory from any of my churches. Just teasing.
I think we should go with surgical procedures the next, arthroscopy, biopsy.
Yeah.
We should name storms instead of making statues. Then it's not as permanent.
There you go. That's one way to do it, right? Okay. So here comes a root canal, I guess, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway. All right. So the big news, of course, over the weekend was the passing of Justice RBG, notorious RBG. It's a big deal when you lose someone from the highest court in the land, right? And of course, she gained a reputation, had a sort of cult following as well, right? What kind of responses did you read that you thought were poignant about her passing or her legacy or her time on the bench?
Well, I know I know of at least 3 responses from friends and relatives, and all of them were deeply saddened. One friend just broke down and sobbed. Another used an expletive in response to some of the things that are happening in the Senate, and then then the third was just bummed, general cloud of depression. All of them see this as a setback because of the timing.
You know, I've tried not to focus on that stuff, although it's necessary, I guess. But if you go back and look at what she was involved in for her whole career, not just her career on the bench, and you know, sort of regardless of your political stance, I understand that there's some things that, you know, there's some things that everybody in public life supports that I don't agree with, and there are things that I do. And but her dedication to sort of equality and to making a way, especially for women, I think is just admirable. And the other thing that I just love about her is one of her best friends later in life was Antonin Scalia. They couldn't have been more different in their in kind of their political and sociological stances. But they really were really good friends, and they loved each other. And what a, you know, especially given the way that our national discourse is now, I think the two of them really, you know, sort of represent a great example of how we can disagree and we can also work together. And that has not been something that I've seen in Washington from either side of the aisle much in the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah, there's a maturity in RBG that was well, that's I don't want to say conspicuously absent, but it's certainly not as present as it could be. And that was her maturity of knowing the difference between people and the issue, and being able to separate the two and talk about the issue and its faults and its merits, and not do the same with people. She was a judge, but she didn't judge people. She judged issues. And I think that's one of the things that made her so respectable in so many different circles, is the fact that she could separate that out and not get personal about these things, and yet realize that there is a personal element in every case that she dealt with. I got a great deal of respect for her, but you know, I didn't agree with a lot of her, well, not a lot, but I didn't agree with many of her different judgments and decisions, but I have the greatest deal of respect for her as a person, because she had an idea and an ideology that really did want the best of what America could be. And you can't fault that. Anybody who wants to fault that really doesn't understand what justice is and what law is, and what, you know, what our potential can be as a country. So, but I like the idea that she was not just collegial. I think you hit the nail on the head, Wade. She wasn't just collegial about this. She was she was truly a friend of many of the justices on the court, specifically the one that would probably be considered her polar opposite on the court. So, but it's kind of fun to see that kind of relationship being pulled out of this, which I think is hopeful for all of us. And it's a shame that kind of relationship isn't being pulled out a whole lot more in our culture and our society today.
Yeah, and I think that was probably what stood out to me the most. I mean, what can I say about her accomplishments and all that kind of stuff? But as you watch these different reports, different networks and articles online, in talking about her death, it was real easy for everyone to bring up the relationship way that you just talked about that she had with Justice Scalia. And so it got me, you know, thinking, yeah, we haven't seen it lately. And maybe that quick tendency in this time when we're mourning her death and talking about her accomplishments, our quick tendency to talk about this great relationship that she had with somebody that she disagreed with on so many levels, it's kind of a sign that, you know, that's what we want, right? And we see it when we see it, we know that's what we want, and that maybe, you know, it's a high profile example. Maybe that gives us hope that It can be example, here in my neighborhood, right? Or my church or in our community, that we can have these great debates together where we disagree, point by point on different things, but that not have anything to do with how we actually love each other. What a strange thing for Christians to marvel at, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That all of us are brought to the table, and Christ doesn't look for your political ticket. He's not asking if you're Democrat, Republican, whatever. He's not asking anything other than, will you follow me? And even in the church, it's such a strange thing for us to see such a kind of remarkable relationship between two people. And maybe there's a lesson, obviously, that we can learn.
I know when you talk about that, it kind of reminds me of H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. And once they stepped away from the political arena, they made an impact together on issues and specific areas of need. And it's great to hear. Yeah, in this particular case, these two were colleagues still in the midst of the political climate and the legal wranglings, and in the midst of that, like you said, John, able to still have a deep, loving relationship. And one of the things that kind of reminds me of a friend who would lean in a different direction that I would politically, or thought on how we view kind of the world, made a comment that this idea of he wants a strong Republican and a strong Democrat presence, because when one of them is weak, that what happens is we go to an extreme, and when you have two strong presences, what you have is more of a balance across the board, because neither one will get all that they want. And I know as we move into the election season, I know that there are those who are, and I was thinking about this, I may even kind of do a survey, but there are those who are praying, good Christian people who are praying that the president and Congress align very strongly, and I mean, that's the prayer whether you're Republican or Democrat, but the result is you're praying for one thing that somebody else is praying against. and probably what would be helpful is that there would be a lot more balance in the whole process, rather than an extreme one way or the other.
So do you guys think that the relationship that they had, that we're all highlighting now, is that just something that we need to appreciate it when the rare occurrence comes that we see it, or is there a way that we can work towards having that ourselves?
I think we need to have that ourselves. I mean, if we want the world to be a certain way, we whether it's the four of us or the people that are in our churches that we work with and that we lead, most of the time when we're working on things in church, it doesn't really matter what our political stance might be. We have some shared values for our community that we're working on, and and that stuff doesn't get very controversial. It's, do we need to help people in our neighborhood? Yeah, absolutely. We do. This whole idea of praying for elections one way or the other, I think it's been given some legitimacy by some Christian leaders. But to me, it's just like praying for the Dallas Cowboys or the Atlanta Hawks to win yesterday. That's a ridiculous prayer.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Sorry, didn't work for me.
If you're praying if you're praying for one party to win over another, I think that's kind of ridiculous. I remember reading back in college, there was a reporter that supposedly asked Abraham Lincoln, do you think God is pulling for the South or the North? What side do you think God is on? I'm using the wrong language, but the question was that gist. And Lincoln responded, I think God is at the side of every widow and orphan of both sides, that God is not wanting us to be tearing this nation apart. God does not want us to lose our ideals of what freedom really looks like. And so, I think what we're praying for in an election is that the nation itself and its Godward bent or whichever direction that we're hoping for will go, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican or a Green Party or a Libertarian or whoever else might, happen to, and any of that is possible. It's just, what is it that we're praying for? Are we praying for the best for our nation? That's like praying for, the co-pilot, because the pilot's the one who set the engine on the plane on fire on the left side, but I'm sitting on the right side. So I don't care. It's kind of really ridiculous. You're thinking about the oddity of that is we're all going down, so you hope that they can keep the thing in the air and land safely. But the idea of praying for one victory over another is I agree. I think it's ludicrous. I think it's silly, but I think, John, to your question, personally, I think we should do both. I think we should not only lift up through actions of ourselves and what we value, but I think we ought to recognize that value when we see it in others, especially in those folks who are, in the public eye. And when we see that, say, that's an ideal that we should all aspire to. And I'm going to start by doing this. And I think, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and that once we start sharing that value, that's the value that becomes, well, it either gets shot down or it gets lifted up, and hopefully it gets lifted up. And that what we begin to see is, I don't want the value that shoots that down. I want the value that lifts that up as being a positive model for all of us to behave and all of us to follow.
That kind of the things you're saying, Brad, remind me of you typically find what you're looking for, and what you're talking about is paying attention enough to see those good examples, like we've shared in this podcast, and because they're there. There are people who have different views. I mean, it does need to start at home for me, because Ellen and I, on that Myers-Briggs, the 4 quadrants, we're exactly opposite in every one of them. And wow. And so we've had to learn to navigate just the personality side of what it's like. And, there's been times when we've been, at odds, and it feels really, those moments I really feel adrift, because I'm stuck in my opinion rather than I am committed to the community that I call husband and wife. And always when that happens, there's this, borrowing from Brueggemann, there's disorientation. I'm unmoored, and the desire to reorient and come to a better place on the other side of that. And that's kind of, we have that opportunity as followers of Jesus Christ right now, because all of us know that we're in the same boat. Mm-hmm. And no matter what the outcome of the election is, we're gonna hit some rough seas. We might even hit an iceberg or two through this process. And so this recognition is especially for us as followers of Jesus Christ, is that we know there's going to be turbulence ahead, and we also know that our commitment is not to an ideology or a particular party, but our commitment is to the kingdom of heaven, and seeing that in the midst of all this, as still continuing to move toward God's good future.
So you're saying there's a storm coming, and it's not really a good idea to name the storm after a politician you don't like. That doesn't help our shared conversation and growth, right?
Yeah, right.
Kind of undoes everything, you know.
Yeah. Kind of makes us take a few steps back. All right.
And
So,
one of the things we hear so much about during election season is presidential politics, and what I prefer to do. I mean, there's a point in the presidential politics where I've made my choice, and that's been done for a while. What I've been doing lately is really trying to get to know people who are running for local offices here in Nueces County, because I know that as far as my community goes, and as far as things really rubber really hitting the road, and I mean that literally and figuratively in Corpus Christi. Exactly. What I like about that is I've had an opportunity to actually interact on email, on the phone, through Facebook messages with people that are running for office, and really kind of get to know them a little bit. And not, are you a Democrat or Republican, but what's important to you, and what's important to you not just for the job that you're about to take over, but kind of what's important to you in your life, because that, to me, that flows into decision making and things like that. And so I would say to people who are fixated on the presidential part of this election coming up, man, pay attention to your city and your county, and right. Figure out who it is that carries the kind of values that you want to carry into that office, regardless of what their political bent is. And I've had an opportunity to meet 4 or 5 really true public servants, and really I don't know what party they belong to, and the ones that I really appreciate, I don't really care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes back to that value statement. Yeah, mm-hmm. What is exactly. It that you value? Yeah, exactly.
And how are we ever going to agree with somebody, even a party, on every single issue that may come up? That's just not a fair expectation to put on in relationships. And so knowing that's true, how do we approach what kind of values you're talking about, Brad, and what kind of ways will we carry ourselves in order to still maintain these relationships and still be able to work together and still be able to work for the good of ourselves and for our communities, and of course, in our context, be a witness to the gospel of Jesus Christ, right? That's what bothers me the most about people in the church that just go off on these political things, and you're making us lose our witness. You're giving us a bad witness a lot of the times, and that's burdensome and bothersome to me. So our relationships are more important than our opinions. Amen.
Amen. Yep.
All right, so here's another story I wanted to talk about briefly. Talk about the story, and then what it kind of made me think about is you all heard about this survey. This came out this past week. A new survey has found that nearly 2/3 of young people in the U.S. are not aware of basic facts related to the annihilation of Jewish people during the Holocaust. What's your first response to that?
Well, it's interesting how quickly we are unaware of the past. I mean, for example, even us, we there's a lot of things I didn't know or recognize that was happening in the 20s and 30s in relation to race, and how people of color were treated in certain places. And so it doesn't surprise me, I guess, that this generation is unaware of some of the terrible events that certainly affected the past century. In fact, what's very interesting, even saying that, suddenly realizing these kids weren't even born in that century. And so as ancient history as it seemed to me back in the 60s and 70s, and then realizing I was born 10 years after the end of World War II. So it wasn't that I wasn't that as a kid growing up and only being less than, like half a generation away from having experienced that. I didn't have a clue about it. I think some of those things kind of rise to the top as you get older and become more aware of the wider range. I mean, John, just asking you, at what point did you become aware of the Holocaust?
I think I was 3.
No,
I was a senior in high school.
Okay.
And to the point that we're talking, I had a history teacher for whom this was one of those important things that he wanted to make sure we understood. Right? We watched Schindler's List as part of the lesson about this and how it happened and why and what was the world's response, all those kinds of things. And so I had somebody who was intentional about making sure that I and my peers. Now, did everybody in that class listen? I don't know. You know how it is on movie day. Some of us fall asleep, right?
Right. Yeah. But accidentally, we've kind of stumbled into the reason that it's not that the kids are indifferent to that. It's that we who do know haven't passed on that information. We haven't been intentional about sharing that, which I think leads to the point you want to, where you want to go in this.
It is. And here's what I wanted to say before I got there. This article, shockingly, some 23% of young adults surveyed said they believed the Holocaust was either a myth, had been exaggerated, or that they weren't sure about the facts. Those first two things, the myth and exaggeration aspects, I felt kind of like we talked last week about fake news and everything else. And I just kind of wonder if that's a part of that, that we're so used to not being able to tell sometimes what's real, what's fake, that maybe that's a part of this as well, that some young person hears some story about 6 million people were killed because of one world leader. Come on, that can't be right. Who would let that happen, right? So maybe that's a part of it. So Tom, let me find it real quick. I forget, this is Gideon Taylor, president of Claims Conference, made this comment about the results of the survey. They underscore why we must act now while Holocaust survivors are still with us to voice their stories. In other words, we still have people who endured the atrocities of the Holocaust. They still have a story that they can actually tell us with their own voices. And of course, those people are older and who knows how long they'll be here. And so while they're here, we need to make sure we're teaching their stories. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Brad.
No, I was just going to say something. 2 years ago, my wife and I went to Germany for our honeymoon. And while she is fascinated with German music, we're both history buffs. And part of our tour around Germany was we had the opportunity to go to Buchenwald and to Dachau. And while we were at Dachau, there were probably 15 or 20 school buses that were bringing in kids from middle school to tour Dachau. And you know how middle schoolers are, field trip, and as soon as they got in the gates and they started going through the museum part, and I'm one of those weird people that likes to watch people. I'm not, perverted that way. I'm a sociologist at heart or something. And I watched their behavior, and the kids went from cool, this is going to be so fun, can't wait till we get lost and everything is going to be great. And then all of a sudden they're starting to read more, and they're getting quieter, and they're getting quieter, and they're whispering. And by the time that they were done with the first part of the museum, they weren't even whispering. There was just this stunned silence. And I found out from the person there at the ticket booth, the ticket counter, whatever it was, when you walk in at the end, when I turned back in my translator machine, that the German schools mandate that middle schoolers not just read about it, not just watch a movie about it, but actually go there. And that's why they don't ever want to let anybody forget. And here we sit, 2,000, 3,000 miles away, and we don't even think about that stuff, 4,000 miles away. We read about it and we watch Schindler's List, and yes, that's important and all, but it's scary when we don't actually see it. Right. And I had read about this stuff since junior high. I've always been in love with history, military history especially. I don't know why, but I just have. Maybe it's because I've had so many uncles and relatives that have, served in sundry different wars around the world, and they tell me their stories, and their stories are always they're not a John Wayne story, they're not a gung ho and all that stuff. It's this is what we really saw, and it was painful, and it was disturbing, but the fascinating part about going there and seeing that is you recognize these were maybe grandchildren or great grandchildren of the folks who would have lived there, right, who would have been imprisoned there, who would have died there. And that's a whole different ballgame when you're seeing it through their eyes. This was where grandma and grandpa went. And it's a whole different, I don't know, it's a different view and a different perspective that really does open your eyes. I'm not surprised that folks don't know the history, because we don't teach history anymore. It's more social studies than it is history, because we got so bored with history as dates and names and places and yada, yada, yada. But we don't tell the story of history, and that's what's really missing in our educational system. And I think that's why we get misguided and misled and these kinds of things. Well, these surveys come out, and we have generations that don't know what truth really is, what fact is, what history is, which makes it even all the more poignant for me when we start destroying monuments and museums and those kinds of things, because that's not necessarily our proudest moments, but it's one of those things that we do. Judaism tells about its defeat in Scripture as much as its victories. And the reason is because we need to know that we are supposed to stay humble before God, and it is only through God's grace. It pains me to think that. I think the point you're going to get to is that intergenerational thing, and what happens when we don't talk to generations. Yeah. And when the generations get segregated, and they're just going to run off and do their own little thing, or they're always done, and we don't get a chance to do that. I've been trying to get my children to spend more time with their grandparents, because they're of an age now where they're not going to be here very much longer, and you're going to miss this, that kind of stuff. So, and I think that's true in the church too.
Yeah, definitely. And that was one of the points that I took from this. Of course, always thinking about, what things mean for the life of the church, and how, by and large, church ministry has kind of taken a step back from intergenerational perspective and attitudes and values. And, let's pay somebody to keep the youth group in order and make sure they don't spill anything on the carpet. Right. Let's get somebody to, take our seniors on field trips, or women's group. And that, I don't mean to devalue those ministries, but one of the things we've lost in overvaluing them is this idea of this intergenerational calling we have as a family of God. And so I did want to give us a chance to kind of talk about that. What are some ways that in the church that we can cultivate and normalize, again, this idea of being a family, intergenerational ministry? What might that look like? Maybe some experiences you've had already, or some things that you think maybe are getting in the way in the church of doing this. Who wants to go first?
What comes to my mind, and this comes, there's so many lessons having lived in a different culture, and how that carries over to how we do ministry. And, my family, Ellen, Daniel, and I lived in Russia from January 1995 to December 2000. And I used to say 5 years, and then I did the math and I go, no, it's 6 years. Not the entire 6 years all in Russia, but we were either in Russia or we were talking about Russia during those 6 years. And one of the ways that I got to know, first of all, the language was I went out and, being an American, I could bring a soccer ball, and that's all it took to get kids out and started kicking the ball around. And next thing you know, I'm surrounded by a bunch of children. My son was also there, but he's more of an introvert. So eventually it was just me, not Daniel and I going out there. But in that process of just playing with the kids, I learned, I learned language. I learned more about the kids. So as a part of any kind of a ministry, it's creating those environments where it's not we're learning a lesson. We're going through the 16 questions for confirmation. I'm doing that right now, but it's not simply that. It's also that sitting down and having a meal. It's going out and playing with them, even if it is and getting killed. Now, I don't do that. I'll play basketball. I'll play, what is it? What's the, I can't think of the one that's in the octagon, the ball kick. Yeah, we're all old. We can't remember those words. Haven't used it in a while. Gaga ball.
Ball.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But, that's where for me personally, that's where I've had a lot of good interaction, and I know the kids' names, and I hear about some of the things that are happening at home and stuff.
Yeah, so our interaction doesn't have to be a test, right? Here come the old people. That means, we got to answer some questions, right? Yeah. All right.
There's
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
A very quick thing about all of this that just kind of intrigued me. There's a movie that my wife and I and my mother, she's staying with us now with my dad being ill up in San Antonio. We watched a movie called The Portrait. It was 19 minutes long. I mean, it was 20 minutes, short movie with Joss Ackland, and I don't know if you know him or not, but it's this intergenerational thing here. It's called The Portrait, and Joss Ackland plays an elderly 90-some-odd-year-old World War II German officer who is now in the last days of his life, and his daughter knows his history and how he used to work for a hospital that did mercy killings. Yes. And her daughter, the old man's granddaughter, has an assignment in college to paint somebody, and she wants to make it a real person, not just a generic person. So she paints her grandfather in this portrait. And what is difficult is this mother, the one who's caught between the two generations. How do you deal with that? And I mean, it really is, it was a powerful short film that I'd recommend, because I think what happens throughout the course of that movie is we get into dialogue. And when we start listening and start caring and start recognizing what's going on in these generations and knowing it from a different perspective, maybe that's what we need to hear. I keep thinking of all of the folks in the early church, the first century church, when the apostles started dying. What are we going to do? How are we going to keep the story going? Well, that's how the Gospels were written. The Gospels were written to tell the story of Jesus, because the first eyewitnesses are no longer with us, or starting to no longer be with us. And then you lose Paul and Peter by the end of the, 6th decade there in that first century. Wow. Now what? What do we do? How do we keep the story going? And so it's important to be with them, to hear them. I think another movie that you might consider would be Paul, the Apostle. And it has Jim Caviezel playing playing Luke, who is then scribing in the Roman prison where Paul is being imprisoned, all of Paul's thoughts. And what you hear are snippets of Romans coming out in that, and how he was being ascribed for him so that the story could continue to be told. And I think those are powerful images. So
speaking of that, Brad, Jim Caviezel, I read recently that he has confirmed that there's a sequel coming to the Passion of the Christ.
Right. Yes, there is.
I mean, what do we call that one?
We call it the Book of Acts.
Yeah.
This time it's personal.
Yeah.
He's back.
He's back.
He's back.
Yeah.
Back, and he's bad.
Yeah. So one thing I read from Fuller Institute, and this is from an old article, several years old, about intergenerational ministry, is that the churches, they try to do intergenerational stuff rather than become intergenerational.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's wow. It's like, okay, intergenerational, that's the key word of the day. So let's go do something intergenerational without, again, cultivating the sense of being intergenerational. So if that is a value we want, that we recognize is important and has so many consequences tied to it, how do we do that? Like, instead of just saying it's a value, like, how do we, I mean, we are all leaders of the church. How do we do that? No, I'm asking you, how do we do that?
We're waiting on your answer.
Doggone it. Yeah. I think it's Wade's turn to answer that question. I haven't heard his voice in a bit.
Well, I think as you guys have been talking about this, I think about how ministry is divvied up in a lot of churches, and mine included. You know, there's youth ministry, there's children's ministry, there's family ministry, there's older adults ministry. And I think somewhere along the line, we forgot that ministry is ministry. And it doesn't have to be so segmented. And that kind of comes from our whole being enamored with programs over the last, 2 or 3 decades. And I think that segmentation has kind of not valued ministry together as an entire community. And so I think you have to do intergenerational things, and all things can be intergenerational. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking about this, and one of the things that, like, let's say with youth ministry, usually we have some youth sponsors, right? And typically they're parent-aged people mostly. Not always, but a lot of times they are. And when we talk about family ministry with our older adults, they're like, "Oh, I've done that all. I'm done with that."
At my time.
And I don't have anything to offer. I'm not at that age anymore. And what I want to say is, you have a lot to offer. You may have a lot more to offer than any of us.
You're still breathing.
Because you can tell those stories from that perspective. So if you're not doing anything, or you're not doing anything that you feel like is effective, I think you have to do intergenerational things. If you're going to say that that's a value, where do you start? You start with having everybody buy into the idea that that's a value. But then, I think you do everything in baby steps. I mean, you got to do things one step at a time. And
start somewhere, huh?
Yeah. And you have to give yourself permission to fail and not quit afterwards. So we tried to do this intergenerational thing, and it didn't work. Post-mortem that and go, why didn't it work? And then, try again to do something else. I think a lot of times in churches, we try to do something and it doesn't work out for whatever reason. And so we think that whole idea is a bad idea because our one chance to dip our toe in the water didn't work out the way we thought it would. Yeah. Well, it only works out if we learn from it. If we don't learn from it, it didn't work out. But that doesn't mean you abandon ship. So
that doesn't mean the value isn't important.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that in this process is having coming back to what you said, Wade, is that that idea is I'm in it for the long haul because you know I know again, kind of referencing my relationship with my wife is the fact that we have been committed to it in the long haul has gotten us through some rough patches, and 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 the same thing if I'm going to serve, say, the youth and love the youth, and is recognize that there's going to be some rough patches, there's going to be some failures, and getting comfortable with attempting and failing, because as you say, Wade, that I can learn from that experience. It's like, okay, it's kind of, this morning I learned, don't put your hand in front of the whistling part of a teapot. It's I won't do that again. But it didn't take long to learn that lesson. But I'm gonna still boil water, and I'm still gonna use that water to make coffee. And the same thing with, I'm still going to love the kids around me, and I'm still gonna make an attempt. And maybe I got got my hand burned a little bit, but I didn't stay there long enough that it couldn't be repaired. The damage is not irreparable.
Yeah. This is a value that is important to me, and I've tried, like you guys talking about long haul, right? I've tried in different contexts, ministry contexts I've been a part of, to bring generations together. Here at Kelsey, we did something last year. It wasn't my idea. I saw another church do it. We do Kelsey Stories, where some of our older saints, we have some questions, and we just ask them to tell us about their faith, and right, how they come to the church, how do they come to faith, and all those kinds of things. And we invite everybody to be there, to be a part of that, but we also keep it recorded. It's on our YouTube page and stuff like that. This Sunday, I don't know if I should say this. I don't know if I'm getting in trouble or not, but I love VeggieTales, like old school VeggieTales, y'all. And my favorite one is the Ballad of Little Joe. I mean, I've used this for Bible studies, right? Because it tells the story of Joseph, and it's funny, man. So anyway, for our youth, our Kelsey kids, our our children's ministry, we're going to stream that through Zoom. And what I've tried to tell the rest of the church, we're doing this as their Sunday school, but we want everybody to be there. Come watch it together, right? Let's be a part of this virtually, and let's learn together, let's laugh together, let's see who's all there. And so just little things here and there. To your point, Wade, if it's a value, then you do something with it, right?
Absolutely.
And, all these things I've done before. When we did the Kelsey Stories, I think I had one young person show up. Well, okay, there's one young person, right? How many people will be here when we do this weekend Zoom and watch it with the kids? I don't know. I'm hoping all of them, but if only 2 show up, well, then I'll take that for what it is. And it's still the value that's important for us, right? So, all right. Any final comments or anything you want to tell everybody before you leave?
I wanna go back to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and I think that because this kind of represents who we are as followers of Jesus Christ. And in an interview, I think it was CBS, maybe 60 Minutes or something like that, and she was talking about in the Constitution where it says "we the people," and she said at the time we didn't include women. And certainly you can also add we didn't include the slaves that we had, right, as our American leaders had slaves, and it didn't include them. We the people, and I love what the expression she used is that and they closed this little segment about our the notorious RGB is she was about expanding the definition of we. And I love that imagery, because we in the church are expanding the definition of we.
That'll preach, won't it?
There you go.
Right on. All right. Anybody else last words? Got it.
Tell
All
the
right.
story.
Tell the story. We have a story to tell to the nations, but we also got to tell it to ourselves, right?
Exactly.
Reminder.
Gotta believe it.
All right. So be nice people, even the people you don't like. Don't name storms after them, and go talk to a young person, or if you're young, go talk to somebody that's old. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thanks
Amen.
everybody for listening, for being part of the podcast this week. If you want us to talk about something, you think there's something that'd be good for us to discuss and go over, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Until then, thanks for tuning in, guys. Thanks for your time. Always good to see you.
God
Thank you,
bless
John.
Thanks, John.